Okay.
Um, I'm actually able to go directly into my microphone, or microphone. I'm wired to my computer now instead of using the wireless like the Wi-Fi because I'm in the room with
Oh,
the router. So,
okay.
all right, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Three, two, wait.
Yeah.
Did you check anything change with the microphone settings? Because I was still getting slight echo on the last
Hmm.
episode, and I
No, I
know
don't.
we figured it was the headphones. So just make sure you're turned way down on your headphones.
Okay.
I mean, not so far that you can't hear, obviously.
Right. Yeah, I've got it cranked way down.
All right, ready?
I just turned it down. Yep.
Three, two, one, go. This is Sasquatch, a podcast about Bigfoot. I'm one of your hosts. My name is Seth Breedlove. I'm joined today by my pal, Mark Matsky.
Greetings from Southeast Ohio, the
Mark,
Bigfoot Mecca.
I feel like I should say your middle name. Like I felt like your mother. Like I was about to. Mark Matthias. I don't know what your middle name is though. So
My middle name's Gerald, which is
okay,
my dad's
which is
first
your
name.
dad's name? Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. Um,
I did sort of feel like I was in trouble.
I'm joined by my pal Mark.
Gerald. I'm sorry.
So, before we get started, this show is going to be a little disjointed. We're going to start out and do a recall of not a recall like a voting recall, but
A
Mark is
factory recall.
yeah, Mark is going to recall his trip to the Cabela's strange, rare, and unusual sightings weekend. Is that true? Is that what it's called?
That is what it's called.
Okay,
It's a rather convoluted title, is it
it
not?
is. They should abbreviate it. So we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to talk about some topics that, or a topic that is probably slightly controversial, which is that of the state of the Bigfoot community at large, and this is going to be at least partially spurred on by some current events in the Bigfoot world. And but we'll get to that in a minute. First of all, we're going to start with Mark's journey to where is this at? It's not Wheeling. It's like
It's
try.
east of Wheeling. It still has a Wheeling address, probably for ease,
Mhm.
but it's a Triadelphia address. It's right off of 70 as you go through Wheeling from west to east. You go up a giant hill, and this huge Cabela's is there at the top, along with a bunch of other shopping opportunities.
Ooh.
But just a gigantic Cabela's, and that was I think this is the fourth or the fifth. Maybe it's the fifth strange, rare, and unusual sightings convocation that they've had, and Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum has been the headliner of that for at least a couple times and maybe more. So we just kind of played it by ear, and the date stayed open, and we're only about an hour and a half away. So we made the trek on a Saturday and caught basically all of Saturday's presentations. It actually ran Saturday and Sunday. And reading the literature about the event, it sounded like it was going to be the same stuff Saturday and Sunday, but as it turned out, it sounded like there were more, there were different presentations Saturday and Sunday, which I wish I would have known that going in, but as it worked out, we were there all of Saturday and got a pretty interesting snapshot of sort of the state of Bigfoot research right now. It's like you said, we've got a lot to talk about.
Yeah. Set up this first clip. Who's this? You said his name's Bud.
His name's Bud. I wish I had more information than that, and I really wanted to approach him the day of the event, but he was super busy, as the organizers of these things generally tend to be, and I just didn't feel like he had the time for to kind of buttonhole him and talk to him. But Bud is the one who's responsible for getting the funding for this through Cabela's and putting on uh, the event in total. So he took the opportunity to kind of set the whole show up by making some introductory comments. And his background evidently is in broadcasting, and I think that shows in sort of his ability to hold the audience's interest.
We do not have 100% positive proof that Sasquatch is a living creature. There are several really strong words in the English language. One is garlic. That's a strong word. But the other two that come to mind are know, K-N-O-W, and believe. Those are very strong words. To know something exists. To believe something exists. Very, very strong words. Do we have the positive evidence to say that Sasquatch is a living creature? And I think all of us can shake our heads, no we don't. No we don't. We do not have proof positive. We have extremely strong evidence that further research is required to find out these lingering questions. Sasquatch, we have reported sightings that go back 300 years. 300 years, yes ma'am, 300 years. And not just in our North American civilization, but from around the world. Over 12,000 reported sightings. And many of these sightings are from very credible people. They know, they believe what they saw was real. Here with the advent of trail cameras, we see a multitude of trail camera photographs, some blurry, some inconclusive, some somewhat startling, and some defy explanation as to what they are. And you will see some of those here today.
Was there anything presented, like evidence-wise, that you hadn't seen or you hadn't been aware of that you thought was compelling?
Well, there was a whole presentation by a man named John Kozinski, who has a background in science, and the trail cam photos that Bud was alluding to were a staple of this particular presentation. And I have to say, it started out very compelling, and his research is based out of New Jersey in the Pine Barrens area, and he's found multiple tracks. His presentation, Kozinski's presentation, was extremely detail-oriented. I mean, it's the type of PowerPoint presentation where you can see he was clicking through tons of data and just skipping entire chunks of it. And there was this big build-up to the aforementioned trail camera photographs, and when they finally were revealed, there was just this sense of underwhelm that was very powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't even the best blob squatch photos that I've ever seen. And he took that in an interesting direction. I was on board with him. I was tracking with him, through the whole first 20 minutes, 25 minutes, thinking this is really, really exciting, and to think that nobody's ever really heard of this before. But then when he showed the photos, it was just a real palpable sense of letdown. And he went so far as to say, well, we don't really know what we're looking at, so it makes sense that this wouldn't register with our, mind's eye or our brains or whatever. But it just seemed like really the pictures could be anything. There's nothing really even that squatchy about the photos themselves that would make you think, oh, that's a distinctive Bigfoot shape. So now I will say this, I should have had this information ready to go, but he is putting all of his research online for free for anybody who wants to kind of rifle through it and see what he's been up to. The one thing I thought was kind of cool about his presentation is he did say, rather than setting the camera traps for motion sensor, he has them on time-elapse. And so he's able to show, like, over the course of a day, stuff that shows up on the trail cameras. So that was kind of interesting. Probably most compelling of the presentations that day was Meldrum, and I'll talk about him a little bit later probably. It was compelling for a couple reasons.
Uh-oh.
And yeah.
I want to know now.
You want to know now?
Yeah.
Okay, well, one thing was, this was a day-long event, and it ran well over the advertised time. You know, they had posted they'll be done by about 5. Well, it was 8 o'clock, and we were still in the midst, I think, of Meldrum's presentation. Sadly, most of the attendees had cleared out by the time Meldrum went on,
Wow.
which was totally not what I was expecting. And as somebody who does a significant amount of public speaking, I felt bad for him because, you know, the last slot of the day is sort of your headliner spot. You know, that's your cornerstone presenter. And, you know, I don't think there were 50 people left by the time Meldrum even went on.
Wow.
On a Saturday night.
Yeah.
But the thing that Meldrum did is his presentation on Saturday, I can't speak for Sunday, was basically the state of Bigfoot studies in pop culture these days. And he started out with he went from the bad and then transitioned to the good. And so the bad, you know, started out with kind of a attack, if you will, on Rick Dyer, and kind of showed a picture of Rick Dyer urinating on a copy of Meldrum's book. It was just kind of bizarre. It was a weird way to start, and kind of went on from there to talk about other prominent hoaxing that's gone on. And the thing about it that really stunned me is I thought, okay, now would be the perfect time for you to make a comment on Todd Standing and Bigfoot North or Sasquatch North or whatever it was. And he completely passed by any reference to Mr. Standing or anything of that nature, which I thought was just, you know, I was amazed because he had just gotten done talking about how these questionable characters make Bigfootery sort of a slippery place, and to make no mention whatsoever about something that's been a firestorm over the last number of months was, I don't know. I guess I was surprised that he didn't even make a passing reference to it. It's just as if none of that existed. But, and then he transitioned into talking about his journal that he's gotten going, and went into detail about a 3D printed skeleton of projected Bigfoot type creature, and showed pictures of this 3D printed skeleton, stuff like that. So that was pretty fun. And I do want to say, too, that in person, Dr. Meldrum was way more engaging and friendly and generous with his time than I ever imagined he would be. I mean, he comes across as a nice guy and stuff on camera, and my experience was he's even more of that in person than you'd have any right to expect.
I'm going to play one more clip you sent me. It's Doug Waller from Sosby. Set this one up.
Okay. This is he's talking about a sighting report from Salt Fork, and it's one that we've touched on, or maybe we've talked in passing about when we talked about Ohio Bigfoot. But this is a multiple sighting case that took place on the trail in Salt Fork, and he gets into just the more detail than I've heard about the events of that day.
I didn't have it queued up.
Ah.
Classy. All right. Here we go.
Or is that the name of the program? That's the Destination America channel, the Monsters and Mysteries show. This Eddie family, mom and dad, and I believe 3 kids, were out at Salt Fork on Memorial Day weekend a couple of years ago. Sosby actually had a camp out going on at the group camping area. So we're sitting around the fire. It was just before dark. I get a phone call from a lady named Michelle, who is the sister of Mrs. Eddy, and she says, "Are you guys out at Salt Fork?" I says, "Yeah, are you coming out?" She says, "Listen, my sister and her family are out there right now, and they had a Bigfoot sighting, and they're sitting up on top of the Morgan's Knob trail on that picnic table, and they're scared to death, and the kids are crying, and can you send somebody up there?" I said, "It's done, don't worry." We sent 7 people up there, and I know some of the people in the crowd I've seen here today were up there. I know Dave was there, and Dave Blue Tracker, and Mark Hudak, and Denny and Chris, but anyway, 7 people went up there and talked to the family, and what had happened was they were out there just hiking, and they maybe picnicked earlier in the day, decided to go up to the Morgan's Knob Trail. When they got clear to the top of the hill, it's a good little walk up there. So when they get to the top of the hill, mom and dad have to sit down at the picnic table and catch their breath. The kids continued on over the hill down into the trees, and they were exploring around. After 5 minutes or so, the parents heard cries and screams coming from the woods. Something had happened to the kids. So Mr. Eddy gets up, runs down the hill to the tree line, finds the children in hysterics, and 2 of them ran back up the hill as soon as they saw their dad, went clear back up to the hill to the picnic table, to the safety of their mother. The dad found out from the 3rd kid that was still there that they had seen this Bigfoot, and it peeked out from behind a tree and scared him. So this picture was taken later. This wasn't at the same day, but this is the actual tree that they said the thing was peeking around from. Let me see your pointer here.
I'm picturing the tree.
And I want to show you. This is about, I think, 6 feet high right here. You notice this tree has a bend in it. Okay, the kids provided drawings for us as to what they saw. And I want you to look at the similarities here. This is the older daughter, I believe. There's the tree, and this is the head of the thing.
So this was the sighting that was on Monsters and Mysteries.
Yeah.
Okay, I've seen that. I know exactly what he's talking about.
Yeah.
And you have more clips you sent me, but we're already at like 20 minutes talking about this. But overall, what did you think of the event overall?
Well, first of all, it's free. And for free, it was exceptional. I mean, we had a wide range of presenters, and, that's the first time I had heard Meldrum in person, and bringing in stuff that really very few people have seen yet. I thought it was really well done. Kudos to Cabela's for reaching into their corporate purse and sponsoring something like this, because that it was a real high level of information that was given out.
Cool.
Yeah.
I've meant to go almost every year and have never gone. It's only like 2 hours from here too. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been to that Cabela's, so I know
Yeah.
exactly where it is.
Mm-hmm.
Let's segue into the how do you want to do this? The state of Bigfoot community today. Do we even want to talk directly about this cloud hanging over the at least the Facebook community over the last
Boy,
week?
I don't know how directly we want to talk about it. I don't know. I mean,
We're not completely disconnected from those involved, is what I'm going to say.
right. Good. I think that's fair.
Yeah. So essentially, though, anyone involved in the community probably knows that over the last week there was this huge kerfuffle over another Bigfoot podcast. Although I don't know how much it even relates to that. Essentially, the controversy erupted because of a sighting with details that were lacking or not. It's hard to. So here's the thing. It's interesting the correlations to this of this sighting and the errors involved in the sighting that people have found. Basically, the person. Geez, this is like ridiculously difficult. Everyone knows who I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Sasquatch Chronicles. I'm just going to go all the way. Sasquatch Chronicles is a podcast. Their host, Wes Germer, has been on this show. He had a sighting in Washington State, and he recounted seeing the moon in the sky, and he recounted geographical location of the sighting. And online, some people have found flaws in his recounting of the tale. And what's interesting about this to me is that I've seen this exact same error in another well-known Ohio researcher, probably the most well-known Ohio researcher who isn't on TV today. Well-known Ohio researcher whose sighting also had a similar flaw that also involved the moon. So this isn't my first time to see it. We're not here to talk about Wes's sighting and the veracity of it. We're actually here to talk about the community as a whole and the way the community reacts to things and the way the community interacts with each other, if I'm not mistaken, right? That's kind of what we want to do.
That's really, yeah, the direction.
Yeah.
It just brings up all those issues all over again.
Right. And watching this one incident play out is a pretty good analogy, or not an analogy, but a pretty good stand-in for pretty much the way the community reacts to every incident. You have people who will blindly believe anything someone says. 100% no matter what. You had this with Rick Dyer. I'm not comparing anyone to Rick Dyer. I'm saying you had this with Rick Dyer. You had your people who blindly believed Rick Dyer even after the 2008 incident. And they'll defend him and his right to say whatever he wants, and how dare us try to call into question his sighting. It's his event. He knows what he saw, blah, blah, blah. You have people who, now this is the one that blows me away. You have people who say, who cares if he's lying? He makes a great show. Or who cares if it's a real dead Bigfoot? It's a lot of fun. That one fascinates me because people are giving money to someone. So if they are lying and they're called out on it, I don't think our reaction should be who cares. The other reaction is kind of the exact opposite, which would be to almost form I hesitate to say witch hunt because that's not what I mean, but almost form like I call to mind visions of like the townspeople in Frankenstein with torches, running across the countryside on a hunt for Frankenstein. That's kind of what I think of when I think of some people when they're reacting to this, which is to go so far overboard that they're death threats are being made and everything else. And believe me, this has actually happened. I know people involved in this. I know that there have been death threats made over this possible this incident. I know that there have been death
Yeah.
threats.
Yeah. Well, I listened to, I don't know if you heard it, but the very latest episode where Wes and Woody are together and they're reflecting on all this stuff that's happened,
Sure.
and he's talking about people who have called him like in the middle of the night asking for death certificate of his grandfather because that ties in, to the story, or their father, so one of their family members.
Sure.
And I mean that serves too as a snapshot of the extreme reactions to
Right. Right.
the claims that are being made,
And
and
it's
just how out of bounds that is.
right. And
Who would do that?
it's really I don't know if you know who Racer X is. Randy, I don't know how to say his last name, Filipovic, something like that. Anyway, he has a blog. I cannot remember the name right now. I'm terribly sorry if he listens to this. But he does a lot of investigating into, hoaxes and stuff like that, and he's really good at it. And he found holes in that Bob Garrett story. I don't know if you're aware of the Bob Garrett, the tent video thing where Bob Garrett was supposedly shut down by the government. Randy actually went and made phone calls to National Park Service, made phone calls to local police, and basically found that there's no truth to those stories. That's the way you handle this. You don't handle it by threatening to kill people and calling people at 3 a.m. And it's just that pitchfork and torch, tar and feather mentality isn't going to work. But it is how this community, a portion of this community, has handled and reacted to events as long as I've been involved in it. And it's wrong. I mean, that's not the way you handle any situation like this. We aren't law enforcement. You don't have the right to threaten someone's life, even if they are lying over something. Having said that, I don't believe in this mentality either that we're just supposed to let things slide if we sense that something's off.
Yeah, it's a very weird ethic, I think, that says, who cares if it's real? It's a good show, it's good entertainment, so just go on with your bad self. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's not what this field is about, really. I mean, yeah, everybody loves the anecdotes, okay?
Sure.
And I think, to a point that Wes was trying to make on the show, whatever his experience was, he wanted to create a broadcast where people could come on and share their stories in an uncritical atmosphere, where you could go on and know people were not going to mock you or make fun of you or roll their eyes when you're telling your story. And I think in that respect, that's the success that they saw was due to that. But there comes a time where you do have to be critical, not in the sense of criticizing, but thinking through the facts as they're presented. And does this make sense? Does this story hold water? And not to certainly not to do an ad hominem or against the person attack. That's not the point. As you said, it's to just simply ask a few questions. Does this story stand a little investigation? And if not, it's just if it doesn't, then it's just campfire stories.
Sure, and that's an I say the word interesting on this show so much, and I've been called out on my pronunciation of the word, and now every time I say it, I'm like aware that I'm saying it wrong. Anyway, there are. I don't think there's just two types of people, but there are the sect of people who are only interested in Bigfoot because of the stories. That's why they have some, semblance of interest in the subject is because they like the scary stories. It's what is so appealing about Missing 411. It is so appealing about the mystery primate in the woods murdering people and carrying them off in their sleeping bags in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
That is what gets people off. They get excited over that. There are also people who want to solve the mystery. People who want to know if there really is an unknown, unlisted primate running around North America. And I do think that I've said this before, maybe even on this show. I have a little bit of both. I love the stories and I love the culture. I'm fascinated by the culture and I'm fascinated by the people. But I also think that if we're going to be involved in this, we should have an ultimate goal of trying to solve what's going on. And the problem is when you're so locked into just hearing scary stories, there's got to be something behind it, because this isn't, most of the time when someone is out there telling their sighting event, it isn't a person just saying, here's my cool, scary story, let me tell it to you. It's someone claiming to have had a very personal encounter with an unknown creature, and they are telling it to you as a truth. Therefore, it should be investigated or critically examined as to whether or not that person is lying to you. I'll say this: I feel a certain responsibility to try to figure out if Wes was lying or not, because he told the story to me on this show.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to threaten to kill him or call him at 3 a.m. to get his death certificate or whatever. I'm not going to do that kind of thing, but I will try to gain some answers on that thing myself, because he's told me the story. I would feel that way if someone told me a story about seeing a cheetah cross the road in front of them in North Canton.
Mm-hmm.
You should approach, if someone's going to tell you what they're claiming is the truth, and it's something that is in the slightest bit unbelievable, or not unbelievable, but fantastical. Mm-hmm. I believe it is our responsibility to try to examine whether or not there is truth to it.
Yeah. Well, there's an old saying, trust but verify. Mm-hmm. And I think that definitely holds true in this case. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that I hear this a lot in reference to Bigfoot and investigations, where people will say, well, I'm a pretty good judge of character, and I can tell right away when somebody is lying. And I've gotten to a point where I feel like, really? Are you really that good at knowing, like, within 30 seconds if somebody is lying to you or telling the truth? I mean, I know that there are physical signs when somebody's not being truthful with you, and you can pick up on those. But just because you're shaken up by an event that took place and you're convinced that you saw something out of the ordinary, doesn't necessarily mean that you really saw something completely unexplained. You could have been truly terrified by something explicable. And so I'm right there with you. I think that, and it's not a slap in the face or a comment on the person's character who's telling you the story. You're not intimating that they're a liar just by wanting to get more facts about the story. You just want to be able to, truly participate with a clear conscience.
Yeah, and the other part of this is there's a huge audience of people who are being told this story over and over again, which when it's that in the public eye, it's going to come under a lot more scrutiny. And if you're going to tell your story as often as, and I'm not shooting Wes down for telling his story if his story is real, it's not his fault for just recounting it. Mm-hmm. But you got to expect it to come under a certain level of scrutiny, and it certainly has, and it's going to continue to come under a lot of scrutiny. I will say, I don't know. I don't want to get too far off base, but on the other hand, at this point, I feel like we just roll with whatever. So I don't know if I talked to you about this, but when I was making Minerva Monster, we were interviewing some of the witnesses and some of the people who interviewed the witnesses, the police chief and the Akron Beacon Journal reporter, and then, some of the people who actually had sightings. And I can tell you little things about their sightings didn't line up a lot of times. A lot of little details didn't line up. Now, obviously, you're talking 30 some years ago, but I've seen people go online and say, hey, you know what, if this event was such a major event in his life, there's no way he would forget this or no way he would forget that. It's not necessarily true.
Right.
People forget things, especially 30 years down the line. But even without, that length of time, the people forget details. I think the killer thing here is that Wes has recounted literally looking at the moon, and there was no moon. Geographically, there's things about what he was saying, where he was, that don't line up with where the sightings took place. If you look at it on a map. Now, they did give the GPS coordinates. I haven't had time to look into this stuff. To be honest, I have better things to do with my time right now. If someone is out there looking into this seriously, and I know there are, I'm excited to see what they find. I just haven't had time to do any investigating of it, myself. I really want to talk about certain things that I don't want to draw too much fire from people, because I don't want to, really get under. We've always tried to shy away from controversy on the show.
Yeah.
Not because we're afraid to stick our necks out, because I don't think Mark or I have any problem with talking, speaking our minds. I don't think either of us do.
No.
But as a show that is supposed to be intended for people that are just coming into this subject, who are just gaining an interest in the subject, something like this probably doesn't hold a whole lot of interest or hope.
Right.
This doesn't inspire you to want to continue to have an interest in the subject of Bigfoot when this is what you're coming into it and finding.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that when you are called out on something and your reaction to it is to throw other people under the bus, that's a problem for me. My suspicion is up.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that has happened here, and not just on one side. That's happened all around. Everyone is. This was you can't underplay the importance of Sasquatch Chronicles, and a lot of people are. I talked to a friend of mine who's involved in the Ohio Bigfoot community, and we were talking about the show, and he asked me how many people. His reaction to this whole thing was like, "Well, who cares? It's not that big of a deal." He's like, "How many people even listened to that show?" And I said, "Well, at least 500,000. I mean, it was a ridiculous number of people, and you got to think the amount of people that are interested in Bigfoot, who are listening to Bigfoot podcasts and reading Bigfoot books, is not 500,000 people." Mm-hmm. So this is 500,000 people that probably didn't have a great knowledge of this subject before Sasquatch Chronicles. And this show might have actually served as an introduction to Bigfoot for those people. And now this is going on, which, and I hate to tell them this, but this is not uncommon. In fact, it's just another controversy of the month. Yeah. We'll have another one next month, and there'll be another one next month, and another one next month. And it's just the way it goes.
Yeah. I'd like to make a point that's related to that, and it goes back to the very phrase Bigfoot community. I mean, that gets thrown around a lot and is sort of an elastic term that can mean different things. I think a lot of what we see today in the horrible negativity is enabled by the internet entirely. And the quote-unquote Bigfoot community today means anybody with a computer and internet access with an interest in Bigfoot, which enables people to, do the type of torch and pitchfork deal that we're talking about with relatively no consequence, for the accuser. But the internet has enabled people to truly attack the person and call individuals into question completely avoiding a face-to-face confrontation with another human being, which just makes the confidence level increase in certain types of people. And I hold that in huge, huge contrast to sort of the old school definition of community, which is an actual group of people who are together, who sort of feel a responsibility for one another and is looking out for the common good. And I do believe that you get that when you are with other flesh and blood people, and you experience small tastes of that when you're at, say, the Ohio Bigfoot Conference and so forth, and with other like-minded folks. And there's so much we could talk about how that's true in sort of subgroups of the Bigfoot community where real people actually get together and they go on campouts and they do quote unquote field research to varying degrees. That's a whole different kind of community, and one that I feel like we do have to say exists, lest a person with a new interest in Bigfoot hears something like this and thinks, why would I want to be involved in a group of people that's going to turn on me for saying the wrong thing at the wrong time? And I would say that's not uniform in the quote-unquote community, especially when you are face-to-face or around the campfire with other like-minded individuals. So I don't know if that makes sense.
No,
but
well, the other thing about that is like things like the Ohio Bigfoot Conference, that gathering of people, I don't know how much time most of those people are spending on Facebook Bigfoot groups. I see some of those people involved in the groups, but I don't see them posting a lot. I think there is a larger community, quote unquote, of people out there who are interested in the subject, who aren't interacting on Facebook or social media, who aren't getting up in people's face over things like this. There's this thing I hear tossed around a lot that we are tasked with policing our own in this community. And I'll agree with that. It's just that we have to understand what the separation is between policing and becoming a complete psychopath is. So that's something to keep in mind too.
That's a healthy distinction, I would say. Something that would be avoided.
Yeah. And I mean, even as we're recording this episode, we've already gotten a comment on the YouTube page angrily aimed at us. So I mean, this type of stuff is not healthy for engaging your audience and having a healthy discussion with your audience when you're going into this type of controversial subject. I don't really think we've said anything all that controversial, though. I don't think we're saying anything other than the fact that
I'd like to think that we're just talking about what is.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much it.
Really have a huge opinion on it, to be honest with you.
Well, that's my thing. If it's not that we're saying one way or the other what we believe about that particular situation, I do believe that you should feel a need to weigh whether or not something that is being told to you is the truth or not. If you are out there just blindly believing everything that's being told to you, you're a fool. I'm drop the mic right there.
Yeah, and that goes back to the phrase, a critical approach. Not critical going in hoping to criticize someone and find fault, but to weigh what you're being told against what you know to be real and true, so that you don't become a participant unwittingly in something that's being misrepresented. Just being smart.
All right, we're going to shut that one there.
Okay.
Yeah, we got a "that's BS" comment on the YouTube page, but it didn't give any reference as to what they were referring to. So
okay.
If you're watching this, feel free to leave a post Let me know what you're talking about so I can tell you how wrong you are. All right. Let's move on to our next subject,
Okay.
which is not something controversial.
Yeah. Oh, never mind.
What?
Oh,
You'll tell me off air.
yeah. Yeah. Don't let me forget because it is amusing to me.
All right. All right. Let me see here. All right. You ready?
Yeah.
This is Sasquatch, a podcast about Bigfoot. I'm one of your hosts. My name is Seth Breedlove. I'm joined tonight by my pal Mark Matsky.
Greetings from Southeast Ohio, Bigfoot Mecca.
All of Southeast
It
Ohio.
is. Yep. From Columbus, fan out in a southeasterly direction. Just look out.
Yeah.
Bigfoot time.
Everywhere. Driving down the road, skateboarding on the sidewalk.
Yep.
They're all over.
Riding a tractor.
Yeah. In and out of coffee shops. This week we are doing a part 2 to an episode we did a couple months ago, Untold History of Sasquatch. And if you remember that episode, we talked about sightings that might not be as in the public eye as the quote-unquote classics. So this is one of my favorite parts of the subject, I guess, as a whole of Bigfoot, which is kind of the smaller scale, maybe not smaller in scale at all, actually, but these lesser known sightings, flaps, what have you. And last time we talked about a lot of really older sightings. I think this time we're going to go and kind of move forward a little bit, and we'll probably do some of those older sightings as well. But we're going to talk about some of the maybe less popular Bigfoot sightings. We both have ones we wanted to get into. So I'm going to let you start us off, Mark.
All right. I'd like to talk about Momo.
Yes.
Because Momo is one that when I first heard about it, it was kind of a breakthrough moment for me because it was moving me out of the Pacific Northwest as sort of Bigfoot's home base. And it was the realization that in the heartland, there's a lot of weird stuff that's gone on as well. Mm-hmm. And the Momo case, and of course that's short for Missouri Monster. And that may in fact be another case of a newspaper editor or a reporter, coming up with that snappy sort of moniker for a creature. But this came out of that magic time that was the 1970s, where it seemed like there's just this explosion of realization of Bigfoot in your own backyard. And we can pinpoint this to 1972. Actually, the first part of this is in 71 in July, and this reports about Momo start in a fashion that's almost cinematic. I mean, you can completely imagine this being a episode out of a movie where two women, Joan Mills and Mary Ryan, were looking for a spot to have a picnic just in the summertime. They found a pretty nice site, and they were on this dirt road. They start to put out their blanket and their food and stuff. And the first thing that tipped them off to something strange going on was a pungent odor. And at first they thought, well, it's probably like a family of skunks or something. But over her friend's shoulder, the one lady saw in this brushy thicket from about the waist up what she described as a half ape, half man. And after the experience, she started reading up on all this Bigfoot and abominable snowman stuff. And she said this was definitely, while it had gorilla-like tendencies, it was really more human, more like a hairy human, she said. And it made a little gurgling sound like someone trying to whistle underwater. And there's a picturesque description for you. So, as if that wasn't enough, the creature steps out of the brush towards them. They run to their car and lock the doors. The creature kept making this gurgling sound and actually sort of rubbed the hood of the car and then tried to open the doors. Like actually went for the handles and tried to get the doors open. So they had the presence of mind to blow the car horn, and it startled the creature. It jumped straight in the air, evidently, moved back. They kept beeping the horn, and they did this because in the middle of this whole thing, they made the realization that her purse was still out there on the picnic blanket. So, and the keys were in her purse to the car. So they had to try and get rid of the creature, and the car horn seemed to be working. It seemed to realize that the horn wasn't dangerous. It stopped right at their picnic site and picked up the sandwich, ate the sandwich, and then picked up the purse, dropped it, and then walked off into the woods. And so Joan Mills ran out of the car, grabbed her purse and the keys, and they tore back to St. Louis and actually submitted a report to the Missouri State Patrol. So that incident kicked off what would become, a real flap of sightings, kind of centered around one family, the Harrison family. And there's a somewhat famous story about July 11th, 1972, where Terry and Wally Harrison, 8 and 5 years old, were outside playing, and older sister Doris was inside. She heard them scream, and she looked out the bathroom window and saw a 7-foot-tall, black, hairy creature standing by a tree, and it was flecked with blood because it had a dead dog under its arm.
Mm-hmm.
And the Harrison's dog got sick shortly after that, and that started Edgar Harrison, their father, on sort of this crusade to try and find out the truth about Momo.
It seems like Momo really hated dogs, just in general. But one of my favorite things about Momo was the title of the first story that centered around Momo, which ran in 1972 July. It's just titled "There's Something on Marzolf Hill."
Yeah,
which sounds like the title of an old B horror movie.
Yes, it does.
And but yeah, I was gonna read a little bit of that article, but you basically already talked about it. That article centered around the Harrison family and the boys seeing something in the backyard. It doesn't go into the death of the dog at all, but they did call it a monster Bigfoot bear. So they had three different, all together in this one article, a monster Bigfoot bear. So, but these articles, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I've got at least 15 cataloged in here, documented newspaper articles about Momo. One of them includes an awesome illustration of Momo kind of roaring out of the night. But the interesting thing about Momo is the amount of UFO activity associated with this case. I don't know if you're aware of that stuff, but there was tons of UFOs seen in that area. Maybe not tons, but there was a lot of UFO sightings in the area at that time. There was UFO investigators in the area. In fact, I'm looking at one right now. UFO expert camps out but sees no monster. And this is in the early 70s. There's this period of time from 71, 72 up until probably 80, 81. Where this was completely common. I mean, there was almost every day in somewhere across the United States, there was a newspaper article detailing a local monster. But Momo is one of my favorites.
Yeah, the fascinating thing for me about Momo is the dad's sort of obsession with proving that this whole thing was true. And it gets to a point. There's elements sort of Close Encounters where somebody becomes obsessed about finding the truth about something. And in his case, he took a leave of absence from his job and spent 21 consecutive nights camping out, trying to get a bead on the reality of this creature. and felt that he had kind of determined that Momo could use his pungent odor as like a smokescreen almost, or to throw people off. Like he could direct it in one direction, and the monster would take off in another, and leave the investigators just completely empty-handed.
Right.
And just that angle of the story, to me, there's something kind of human and compelling about that. Like this dad wanted to really turn up some sort of definitive proof that this was going on.
Yeah, and the family held like a prayer meeting one night in their backyard. Do you know that story?
Yeah, yeah,
And the creature supposedly came out of the woods and kind of, I don't know if anything happened beyond that. Did it just come
yeah.
out of the woods and terrify everyone?
Well, I think the way that went down is that they could hear it coming. They could hear it getting closer and closer and making sort of this growling sound, loud growl. And his family wouldn't allow him to stick around and actually see it. They pleaded and begged him to let's get out of here, which they did. They drove away before anything was actually sighted. But yeah, it's intense,
You
And
can't play down the importance of it too. I'm looking at an article that was in Oklahoma City right now in July. This would have been July 72 as well. And these sightings don't end in 72. I have reports here from 73 as well. Articles from 73 as well. But this article says zoo director offers home for the creature. And this was the Oklahoma City Zoo, basically, joking around saying, come stay with us, monster. Come stay with us. So, yeah, this I think a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight is probably these smaller town sightings, small town monster sightings. I've got one close to me that I've talked about a few times on the show, and if you follow the blog at all, I've blogged about it because this was one of the first things that I had researched on my own was the sightings here close to where I live in Wadsworth, Ohio, of the River Styx monster. There's a town near where I live called River Styx. It's a tiny little village out in the middle of nowhere, between here and Medina, called River Styx. And the first sighting that I've got on the BFRO database is from, actually, let me see. I pulled it up and now I lost it. No, that's 2076. So 1976, there's a sighting, right outside of where I live now on Greenwich Road. This lady said, I just read of a woman who is now 39. Her sighting was in 76. That blew me away. My sighting was the same year. I was 12 years old when my parents built our house right next to my grandparents and then over a footbridge to my great-grandparents' house. She goes on, talks about running around in the woods, and says, I can remember it was warm out, sunny, the leaves were falling. Since we were heading into fall, the air smelled of leaves. I was standing on my great-grandparents' property. With permission, I could basically go all the way back to the highway, usually with a friend. I was told never to go further than Great Granny's woodline. That day, I went further past her woodline into the woods that was on the right-hand side of the road. Through the woods was another family's home. I started walking through the forbidden path, and about halfway through is when I saw something brown and hairy in a squatting position. At first, I thought it was a dog. Then it stood up. It was at least 7 feet tall or more. I stood there in a frozen position and stared at it. I ran before it could turn around. I was in total fear. The back was covered in hair. The arms hung down. It had very broad shoulders. The body was covered in brown hair. And that was a BFRO report that was submitted in 2004, and her sighting was back in 76. There was another sighting out on River Styx, right by that exact same location, over by Greenwich Road, which I know right where that is. It's not far at all from where I am, actually. Let me see. I lost one of these that I had. There's one from 78. So I did research into this. This was like one of the first ones that I really looked into, and it was mostly because I was, obviously it's close to where I live, so it's easy to look into. Interesting thing about River Styx is that it got its name because there was a swamp there, and there still is a lot of swamp and forest and and river and streams and all that. It's very sparsely populated farm country. Not that it's completely, no one's living out there, but there's a lot of farms and stuff, but also big chunks of woods. And it got its name because of the swamp, which they said was a vast, impenetrable swamp that was inhabited by black bear, cougar, and rattlesnake.
Hmm.
And anyone who went in there died. So it's kind of cool to think that maybe even back when the settlers formed the village of River Styx, there might have been something. Now, having said that, I have asked around out in River Styx, and none of the locals that I've talked to knew what I was talking about. Not that I talked to. I do know that there are people out there because I've heard stories from other people recounting people from that area telling them about seeing this thing or knowing someone that saw this thing, but it's not very well known. I don't think it's exactly popular, especially now, because it looks like most of these sightings were 70s and then up into the early 2000s. And if you go out there now, it kind of makes sense because that area is becoming more and more developed, especially around it. So I don't know if maybe, 70s, I imagine there was probably far less development out there, obviously.
Yeah. Did any of those reports make the papers back then?
No.
No. So it's a lot of local knowledge, really.
It's all just locals. I spent hours at the Wadsworth Library going through microfilm trying to turn up something because I couldn't find any newspaper articles about it. Now, that's not to say there might be something. There might, be like an article that ran that I just never found. But as far as anything I could turn up, it definitely isn't something that it's not well known. The River Styx monster, I don't think, is very well known. There is a listener of the show who actually lives out in River Styx, and he was aware of it. So I do know that some people out there are aware of it, but it's not even a Minerva monster situation where it's like 50-50. I think with the River Styx monster, it's few and far between people that live out there being aware of it. But the stories are very interesting, and they're almost all right along River Styx Road, and usually in areas that are super wooded, and usually following a stream. So that's
it fits the profile, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Excellent. And that's just got a great name too. That needs to be more well known, just on the strength of that name too.
Yeah.
Incredible. I've got a report here, and this goes back to 1965. The thing that really caught my eye about this is in light of sort of the aggressive Bigfoot, and we've talked about that quite a bit. But this goes back to World War II in the Siskiyou Mountains. The owner of a lock and safe company by the name of O.R. Edwards was out hunting. And Edwards says this is, again, this took place in the southern Siskiyous during World War II. He saw a large man-like creature covered with brown hair, about 7 feet tall, carrying in its arms what seemed like a man. I could only see legs and shoes. It was heading straight downhill on the run. I, of course, did not believe what I had just seen, so I closed my eyes and shook my head, sort of clear things up. Looked down the hill again in time to see the back and shoulders and head of a man-like thing covered with brown hair disappearing into the brush, some 70 to 80 yards below. And it emitted a whistle/scream, and that's really about it as far as detail with the case. But I just thought it was interesting, given the interest in kidnapping Bigfoot. Certainly there's other documented stories, but lately there's just been this rash of aggressive Bigfoot and carrying people off and missing in the national parks and things of that nature. And here's one that could potentially be who knows what it was, but to have that take place as far back as the 40s is intriguing, to say
And
the least.
that's a time without a lot of reports. I don't know
Hmm.
what it is about the 1940s, but across America, especially Ohio, there are not a lot of Bigfoot reports or possible Bigfoot reports
Hmm.
or any monster reports, probably because of World War II.
Right.
I'd
I
imagine
mean,
the public eye is on that.
sure. And your pool of men who would be out there,
Mm-hmm.
hunting or otherwise engaged in some outdoor activity were, you know, on another field
Sure,
entirely.
sure. Um, the 1902, February of 1902, um, I came across this report, and this is the only report, so there's not a lot to it, but I love the headline, which is Flee from Swamp Monster. Virginia Terror kills 7 dogs and eats 2.
Whoa.
Suffolk, Virginia, February 11th. L. Frank Ames, merchant of Bennett's Creek, 13 miles from Suffolk, last night had an experience with the dismal swamp monster, which earlier this week killed 7 of Edward Smith's dogs, ate 2 of them, and attacked Smith himself. Ames shot the thing several times without effect and urged his 6 dogs to make an attack. The dogs fled in terror and hid. The monster escaped unharmed and was seen later sitting complacently on the curbing of Henry Jordan's wall. There is more to it. It's described as long, gaunt form, standing on 2 legs, vicious eyes, shaggy yellow hair.
Whoa.
So it's a really interesting report. I don't know if it's 1902,
Hmm.
and I could turn up nothing else through searching for the dismal swamp monster. If someone else does any of this newspaper archive stuff like I do, you can feel free to look around.
Hmm.
But that was all taking place in Virginia.
What
Back,
do you make of the yellow hair
yeah,
detail?
I thought that was really interesting, and it almost put me in mind of maybe this was a mountain lion.
Hmm.
I mean, maybe they saw something. Maybe the guy thought it was running around on 2 legs and it was a mountain lion. It just doesn't. There's things about it it's either some sort of over dramatized event to sell papers, or might have been a misidentification. The yellow. I've never heard. Have you ever heard of shaggy yellow hair?
No, I don't. I don't think so. I mean, the only connection that I can make is, we've talked about white Bigfoot, and you've seen sometimes when a person's hair goes white,
Mm-hmm.
it's not pure white, but it's sort of almost blonde in a way, and
Sure.
maybe that would be a potential connection there. That's stretching. No. I mean, the
Sure.
thing with the dogs though is pretty interesting, and you know, you mentioned as part of the initial Momo report,
Mm-hmm.
uh, kind of a close-up view of that. But also with Momo, there was Edgar Harrison found 2 dog graves that had been disinterred, and the bones spread out after the fact. So that's a whole thing unto itself. This whole antipathy between Bigfoot and dogs. There's just a lot of bad blood there.
Well, another thing that comes up in all of these is let me just real quick, we can go to this one and then you can get another one here, but this is from, for some reason this is back before I was cataloging these with a date, so I don't have a date on this one. It just says New York Monster article, but it's out of New York. It looks like 70s. I'm gonna guess sometime in the 70s, but I thought there was some really cool quotes in here. Stories of the monster of Blackhand Gorge or the Clay Lake creature, whichever you prefer, are spreading. Mrs. Cindy Nethers, Route 4, said the monster has been sighted on her property and she believes something is going on up here, but I'm not sure what it is. Mrs. Nethers says the real problem is not the so-called monster, but the people looking for it. People are coming up here from town with rifles, bows, and arrows, and one man, I believe it was last Thursday, came up here with a bazooka. We're more afraid of people with guns than any monster. Why, you can't hardly shoot a deer with a bow and arrow, let alone a bear. Some believe the alleged monster is nothing more than a bear. And then it goes on to talk about the monster, and it's another one of these hair-covered creatures walking
Hmm.
like a man.
Is that
But
the Black Hand Gorge, just east of Newark, Ohio? Does it?
no, this is New York.
New York. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, this is a
The
New York
other
article.
Black Hand Gorge.
Right, it's that other one. But I thought the mention of the posse of people obviously running through
Yeah.
there. I mean, I'm starting to feel like the monster hunting posse is a must-have for a story to really gain classic status with me.
Mm-hmm.
You've almost got to have guys out in the woods drunk looking for Bigfoot for me to
Yeah.
really think it's fun. And this is just a common. This is like a staple of so many 1970s reports.
It really is. And you remember the Legend of Boggy Creek? I mean, there's a whole section in that film devoted to the monster hunting posse, dogs and everything, hunting, trained to track the creature.
Yeah.
There is a series of reports that I just have to mention here again, and it comes out of the 1960s in southwestern Michigan. It's the monster of Sister Lakes, and Sister Lakes, Michigan, as I said, is directly north of South Bend, Indiana, and south of Grand Rapids, if that helps anybody geographically to get a sense of where it is. It was, like I said, it was a series of sightings. There were, it was centered around a strawberry farm, actually, and strawberry workers, local residents. In 1962, the Sister Lakes creature was described a lot like Momo, with very little in the way of facial detail. Huge, hairy, no neck, that classic description.
Mm-hmm.
In 64, May of 1964, the Sister Lakes monster caused the fruit pickers to leave the fields. They just didn't want to go out and work anymore because this thing was around so much. And on June 9th of 64, one of the workers by the name of Gordon Brown and his brother clearly saw the creature in their car headlights, and they estimated it was about 9 feet tall and really rigid, sort of, in its posture. The farmers who owned the strawberry farm, Evelyn and John Utrup, reported several encounters of their own, and there's a kind of a very close name here to one you're very familiar with. Gail and Patsy Clayton froze in fear when these 13-year-old girls saw the creature on a lonely road in Silver Creek Township. And this then is often linked, just because they're Michigan reports, and the years 1965 then is when you get into that very well-known case from Monroe, where Christine Van Acker is sitting in the car and the hand reaches in and kind of bashes her head against the inside of the car, and she received a black eye from that, and it made all sorts of wire reports and so forth. So the thing that's really interesting about that is in both cases you're talking about southern Michigan, which is, you're talking about, in the case of Monroe, you're a stone's throw from Detroit, and the other Sister Lakes, I mean, that's far from what you would think of as remote and wooded. So it just makes it a kind of an odd place for these type of reports to come out of. And there's more, in the case of Michigan, in and around Monroe, which is seems like an illogical place, really, for Bigfoot to be hanging out.
Yeah, but what's a logical place? All right, we're gonna wrap it up here. Some of these sightings are well known. Some of them are not as well known. I find that the stories I love are ones that are either so far-fetched that the storyteller is just doing a wonderful job of creating nonsense, or they're so tied into modern reports, like things I can look at, even like the mention of the dogs, all those dogs being killed. I don't know if that report's real. There's so little information from that report that it's hard to tell anything. But I find those correlations to be compelling, worth looking into.
Mm-hmm.
And so my favorite stories always have some sort of connection to modern sightings, I think.
Yeah, and recently too, for various reasons, it's been brought to my mind, and I've started to favor these reports where there's a real name attached to that, where it's not just anecdotal, where 3 teenagers reported seeing something come out of the woods on Lover's Lane, but it's a person that you can potentially contact, or at least let their report go on some type of public record. And to me, that's we got into this a little bit with our Bigfoot community discussion, but the willingness to put your name attached to any of these type of stories, I mean, is you're taking a big leap by doing that, whether you realize it or not. You're opening yourself up to a little scrutiny. And to me, that argues for a couple things. Either one is just ignorance, and you don't realize what you're getting into by being public about it, or more, the second option there would be you saw what you saw, and you don't care who thinks what about you, but you're willing to be identified with this strange occurrence.
Sure. Okay, I gotta try and get this uploaded before I go to dinner.
Okay.
So, let me see. What episode numbers were we on? Is this 42 or 40? Is this 42 and 43?
That sounds about right. Let me check. Yep, 42, 43.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna upload this real quick, and